Thanks for having me. We have been traveling. A lot of people, including a lot of the folks on your agenda today, have been traveling all over the state this winter. And so this is actually one of the best crowds I've seen in a while, and it's really cool. Steve and I just saw each other yesterday where we were sitting in front of the Lieutenant Governor telling her all about what ag is doing on this issue, and she was just so excited to hear about all the action. So hopefully you will be too. It's not an easy topic to talk about. It's not super fun, but there is some positives there, and I like to focus on what we're doing about this challenge that's before us. So I hope you all can see that. I do have some handouts in front of you when we start to get to talking about tables and maps. Those are in front of you, so it's easier to see than all the way up here. But we're going to start out by talking about why do we even have a nutrient strategy in the first place? And the short answer to that question really is US EPA. So you got a couple different things going on here. The first is this group called the Gulf Hypoxia Task Force. It's a group that's led by US EPA, but USDA is also there. 5 total federal agencies and state agencies. So the Water Quality Agency, in our case that's Illinois EPA, and the Departments of Ag up and down the Mississippi River Basin. They've been getting together since the mid-90s, and they're focused on the area of the hypoxic zone down in the Gulf of Mexico. So the area of low dissolved oxygen where fish have trouble breathing and living. That group of regulators wants to see the size of that zone get smaller. Their initial goal was a 45% reduction in the size of that zone by 2015. So raise your hand if you think we met that goal. Nope, we're still talking about it. We did not meet the goal, but we get an extension, and we love extensions, so we now have till 2035 to see a 45% reduction. But suffice it to say that they're watching that area, and they want to see it get smaller, and they're tracking it to several different issues, including agricultural runoff up and down the Mississippi River Basin. The second thing at play is we talk a ton about the Clean Water Act, which is the statute here. We talk about regulations coming out of US EPA, so waters of the US and things of that nature. But they also have things out of EPA called guidance memos. And so this issue of nutrient strategies was actually the subject of a memo in March of 2011. And these memos do not have the weight of law, but they're still very important. It's basically the marching instructions from US EPA headquarters out to their regional offices and also their state agencies that have their authority. And this memo actually laid out 8 different elements that these strategies should have while states work on putting the numbers on the books for nitrogen and phosphorus and what the water quality standards should be, knowing that that's going to take a long time and it's expensive and it involves a lot of different opinions. Get to work, getting your arms around what's going on the land now, and start getting people moving in this direction. And that's what every state has had to do. You may have been paying attention to states around us and in the news. Iowa gets a lot of focus because there's a lawsuit over there, right? We hope we don't get to that over here, and all these efforts are geared at having that not happen in our state. For those of you that don't know, that actually came about because Iowa's strategy was done and it was criticized because farmers in the state of Iowa, it's still voluntary for them. And you have drinking water supplies, including the Des Moines Water Works, saying, you know what, that's just not enough. Those farmers need to be regulated. In fact, they should have federal permits. They should have NPDES permits. The National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System permits. If we have any CAFO guys in the room today, you would have heard that term. But every municipality, including your refineries, all have them. So every industry does. The Des Moines Water Works says those tile lines all throughout the Midwest look a whole lot like a point source into a waterway, so it should be treated under the Clean Water Act that same way. So Iowa, that's important to note because that's happening all around us, right? And we hear about other regulation in Ohio where the first wave of legislation talked about how farmers have to now have a license to apply fertilizer. If you farm 50 contiguous acres or more, how many folks in the room would fall? Pretty much everybody. Then you all have to have a license to apply fertilizer if you're farming in the state of Ohio. It's an education sort of thing. They try to link it up with their pesticide permit. Then the second wave of legislation coming out really has farmers looking at the weather before they apply, and phosphorus is also the issue there. That's what happens when you have a city like Toledo having to provide bottled water for their folks because the public supply cannot handle the amount of phosphorus or nitrogen in some cases. So Lots of public opinion can turn very quickly, but every state around us is doing this strategy. Indiana's came out without any hoopla at all, and everybody's happy with that. But you have the political dynamics happen in every single state. And since I'm a lawyer, you're not going to get out of here without hearing about even more lawsuits. And this issue is also, these strategies and all of that are happening in courts all the time. Down in federal court in Louisiana, national environmental groups suing US EPA saying, US EPA, you're not doing enough to decrease the size of the hypoxic zone. And EPA in that case says, you know what, we don't have the resources to be able to do that for every state. We are kicking it back at all of these states to do the nutrient strategies, okay? That's your little history lesson on why we have it. It was not our idea to sit down, but when we were invited by our state agencies, we took full advantage. So you can see this big old list here. We give a lot of credit to our Department of Ag and Illinois EPA because they could have done this a whole lot faster and probably made their lives a whole lot easier. They could have shut their door and just hammered out some strategy without having to hear from anybody. But instead, they actually opened their doors and they invited this wide group of stakeholders with varying opinions on this issue. They invited us in once a month roughly for 8, 9, 10 months to talk through all of these issues. And our meetings are still continuing, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. But you can see here that the discussions were really led by the Department of Ag and Illinois EPA, but there was a lot of representation from agriculture. I was the representative for Illinois Farm Bureau, but you had the Soil and Water Conservation Districts. That association was in the room. You had Gene Payne from the Fertilizer and Chemical Association, Rodney Weinzierl from Corn Growers Association, Jim Kychek, who was at that time executive director of the pork producers. Lots of folks, including Extension. So that's what we talk about under the Clean Water Act, and with this issue, that's our non-point source world. So where you have the rainfall hit it, today's a great example, right? Rainfall hits the ground and you have overland flow. Under the Clean Water Act, you are seen as non-point, which means you are really not regulated by the Clean Water Act in many ways. But the flip side of it is called the point sources, and they have those federal permits. They are regulated. In this case, when we talk about high levels of nitrate and high levels of phosphorus, we're really talking about wastewater treatment plants. So in the areas of our state where we have more population, and if you think about the city of Chicago and how the Chicago River is reversed to actually come down the Illinois, you will see some of these graphs and they will make a lot of sense to you at that point. But I joke that this is not just a farmer issue. If you read the document, it's over 160 pages long, and it talks about a lot of things, not just farmers and what they need to be doing on this issue. So I encourage you, when you have some time to kill or you need to go to sleep at night, just crack open the internet and start looking at the nutrient loss reduction strategy. But it's bigger. This is your Cliff Notes version of how it impacts ag. But I joke that if you flush your toilet in the state of Illinois, this is actually your issue too. So it's not just something geared at farmers. So you have the treatment plants in the room. You also had environmental groups. You have environmental groups with very strong opinions about what should be done, what's not being done, and we're educating them as well in all of these discussions about what you all already do on your fields. Okay, strategy's final, now get to work. I had a son, my son is 7 months old. He woke up at 4:30 this morning because he knew I needed to get on the road at 5:30, but he was born about a week after the strategy came out, so I think our lives are forever going to be intertwined with the nutrient strategy. But it's final, it's a document, it's out there, it's a living document, and it is meant to be implemented, right? So that's what we're doing. This meeting today is part of that implementation. It will continue. We are working every day, many people in a state where we have no budget to be able to find some resources. So that will continue, and hopefully we have even better news to tell you about on that front soon. But what happened was, when they started to put the strategy together, the University of Illinois was actually contracted to do some work to put some science behind the strategy. So looking at whatever data exists, knowing that it's never enough data, right? But let's at least see what is out there. So when the University of Illinois started looking at this issue, they looked at 3 different things. They looked at the current conditions of nutrient sources from the point sources and the non-point sources. What is happening and where is it coming from? The second is the methods that can be used to reduce those losses. For ag, it's best management practices. And we'll talk about what is really meant. And the third thing that they needed to look at, using Gary Schnittke from the university, was how much is this whole stinking thing gonna cost us? On a watershed scale, on a statewide scale, it's gonna cost money to do this, both at the point source world, fixing up that infrastructure within their treatment plants, and on farm fields. You have to work in a world where money is actually paid attention to. This is one of the graphics that shows up in the nutrient strategy. This is the map of our 8 major river systems that leave our state. So at the end of last year, the Illinois EPA actually invested in money, putting money in with USGS so that now there will actually be continuous monitors at each of those gauging stations, just slight, up the river of the state boundary. So now for the first time we'll actually know more about what is leaving our state. We know a whole lot of business happens between our boundaries and the Gulf of Mexico, but we will have a better indication of what's leaving. So that includes nitrate, it includes phosphorus, but it also is things like flow, temperature, all these other turbidity, total suspended solids, lots of things being taken into account, which has never happened before. So that investment is a good thing in our state. There's also discussion, there's monitoring wells as far as groundwater, and there will probably be more monitoring of the groundwater too. The strategy just very briefly touches on groundwater. This is an effort at improving surface water, those bodies of water that stay in our state and are used primarily as drinking water, and also the things that leave our state. So it's an in-state focus and also the Gulf of Mexico. It's kind of two-part. Trying to be something for everyone, I believe. But this is also another graphic that shows you the annual average riverine loads of nitrate and phosphorus. So I know y'all are probably having trouble seeing it in the very back, but the black bar, the list over here is actually all of those 8 systems that end up leaving our state boundaries. The black bar are your annual average loads of both nitrate and phosphorus, 1980 to 1996. So your average loads back then. The red is that same number, 97 to 2011. So, if you say, my New Year's resolution in 2016 is I'm going to lose 25 pounds, right? You have to actually get on the scale and find out, in fact, how much do I weigh if I'm going to subtract 25 pounds? This is the same concept. We have to figure out how much we're putting into the water before we can say, and we're going to reduce that by X amount. So this is pretty cool. We're going to back up that clock. We are going to back it up from the average loads 1980 to 1996 because we have all made a whole lot of strides in how effectively and efficiently you use your nutrients in your field, and we want to be able to get credit for that. Now, tracking of practices, we can't probably go back and everybody recall. I know you all have great memories, but you can't recall exactly what you did on all of your fields 1980 to 1996. So there will be surveys coming out, USDA NASS surveys, asking you, we'll talk about this in a little bit, asking you what you did on your field. We're going to back that up to 2011 so we can see what's changed since that time. But this is the loading, and that's when that clock will start. These are the graphs that show up in the handout in front of you, so don't try to see it up here. But your handout actually shows you a couple different colored versions of the state of Illinois, and that's because we like to talk about priority, right? Money and time is limited no matter what you're dealing with, and so you always have to look at where to go first. But here, you have a whole list of priorities. So whether you're looking at point source, if you're looking at non-point source, if you're looking at nitrate or phosphorus, your state looks very different as far as colors. So I just put up here those the non-point source, which means row crop agriculture, those priority areas. So the blue over here shows you the nitrate levels. These are the areas where we're having, the darker the color, the more nitrate losses you're having, the more you're yielding into the water. So data shows the upper, generally speaking, nitrate tends to move with our water. So where we lose more water off our fields, that's great. We also tend to be losing a little bit of nitrate with that water. Where we have those tiles, it moves a lot faster. The phosphorus issue is very different though, and we get a very different colored version of our state. So we all know that phosphorus and soil move together. It doesn't take a whole lot of soil to start to impact water quality, to impact and see a difference for your water quality standards. I've seen discussions of like a gallon jug with a grain of sand. That's how much you need in there to start to impact water quality. So it's not a whole lot. We've made a ton of advances in how we keep the soil out there in the fields and not into the rivers or the streams, but it's still impacting water quality. When we talk about water quality standards, that's something that the US EPA would like to see for both nitrate and phosphorus. In our state right now, we don't have a nitrate standard for the water. We have ammonia and a bunch of other fun stuff, and literally pages and pages of regulations with different water quality standards. But we don't have nitrate. We do have phosphorus, but it's only for lakes that are 20 acres or more and the streams that feed those lakes. It's not a phosphorus standard for every single stream in our state. So that is something that US EPA and our environmental groups in our state really are pushing for. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So just, cut it and just tell me what did the science assessment find? Well, here is your slide that tells you what the scientists at the University of Illinois, looking at the data that exists, what they found. They found that Illinois contributes 20% of the nitrate and 11% of the phosphorus that eventually makes its way down to the Gulf of Mexico. Depending on how much rain we get, we are neck and neck with Iowa. So if we get a lot of rain or they get a lot of rain, we're either number 1 or number 2 for nitrate losses. That is something that the data shows. Of that amount, what is ag responsible for? Well, we can talk about these pie graphs a minute. So let's look at the nitrate in the middle. The big green is what's coming from ag. The red piece of that pie is from your point sources, so your sanitary treatment plants. And the teeny tiny little sliver of blue that you probably can't see in the back is urban runoff, so suburban lawns and golf courses and things like that. If you see here, that's an 80% piece of the pie that belongs to agriculture for nitrate. But look over at phosphorus. It is a totally different pie. It's split about down the middle between your non-point sources and your point sources with a 4% tiny little sliver of urban runoff. So something that we have to talk about here. The science team was looking at data that exists. They know the total, roughly, right? They have a little bit of data on urban runoff. They have super good data on point sources because we talked before about how they have permits. They have federal permits that Illinois EPA has the delegated authority to handle, and they have monthly limits, they have annual limits. If you blow your limit, you also have to tell the compliance folks at EPA. So suffice it to say they've got a ton of data. So they take the total, they subtract what they know, and they assume the rest. So everything else that belongs to ag is an assumption. And we could push back and say, you know what, we're not really 80% of the nitrate issue. We're probably more like 65 or 52, but we have no data to push back. And we know that ag is not every other acre in our state. There's things like forest and other things where we don't grow row crop agriculture. I think we'd probably all like it if we did, but that's not the case. So we know that we have some stake in the game, both for nitrate and phosphorus. We use a lot of the products. We grow a lot of crops in our state that use those products. So we have an opportunity here to do something voluntarily, and we're gonna rock it, and we're gonna keep going with what we do. But we have to talk about how those numbers were assumed. Okay, we talked before about the 45%. At some point in time, that's our goal. That's what US EPA wants. That's the goal that all of these strategies have to have in them. One of the points where Iowa started to get contentious, which led to lawsuits, is because they had no other goal beyond 45% at some point in time. So our regulator said, you know what, I think we need something more immediate. In 10 years, we need to see a 15% reduction in nitrate losses and a 25% reduction in phosphorus losses. That is what you lose, not what you're using. That is very, very important, and you'll hear from a lot of people today looking at things you do in your field. We say in these meetings with all the other stakeholders, that's cool because no farmer in the state actually wants to lose it to the water either. So tell us what to do to keep it for our crop, because in many times we paid really good money to have it there for the crop. So tell us what to do to keep it there. And here's the big thing. This is the thing that's super fun to talk about, is how much does this cost? Well, you'll see how this was arrived. Lots of assumptions made. There's a whole chapter in the nutrient strategy where Gary Schnittke actually worked through these numbers and made a lot of assumptions. But it's roughly $800 million a year, amortized over 20 years, to be able to address this issue. I don't know what's happening in Springfield. I know there's lots of guys, but I don't think they found $800 million extra dollars. So non-point ag. It essentially is telling you when research has been done, peer-reviewed scientific research backing up BMPs, and it shows that those are effective at reducing your nitrate and your phosphorus losses. What the science team did is they took that and they really looked at how much you get, what your bang is for your buck, right? How much would it cost versus how much you're reducing your losses. And then they combined it on a statewide scenario to find out how much action do we need to see in the state of Illinois. These are the tables in front of you, and I will not spend a lot of time because Steve gave me my 5-minute warning, and I have a lot to say usually. So the first table there are your nitrate practices. Dan will be talking about a lot of them, but it ranges from at the top, things you do in your field, then you go down, edge of field practices like bioreactors and wetlands, and then land use changes, which we don't have to talk about because I think y'all would like to keep growing corn and soybeans in many cases. So, but it's on there, so don't start throwing tomatoes at me because it has research to back it up. But let's go back up that table. Look at things like using inhibitors or following the MRTN or split application. You will see moving away from fall application. That is not the silver bullet across the state, but it's been researched, so it shows up on there. If you flip to the next, and well, first of all, track that all the way over. You can see it much better on the document in front of you, but you see a cost associated, right? That MRTN would assume that if you're reducing your rate to the recommended rate instead of over-applying, which the science team said when they looked at the data, they didn't think that was the problem in the state of Illinois. Awesome, right? So, but if you are going to reduce your rate, then you're saving money. That makes sense. But you can take a look at that. Let me know if you have questions. I'll be around for a while. Phosphorus is the same, though. Things you do in your field, things you do at the edge of your field, and land use changes. And the very, very bottom there are those point sources. So many of the sanitary treatment plants have a phosphorus limit. If they crank up that limit, meaning they can't let as much phosphorus out of their pipe as they currently do, they will spend, first of all, millions of dollars to make those changes into their infrastructure, and they will reduce their size of that pie substantially. So very important, but the things in your field are soil tests. Finding out if you need more phosphorus before you in fact apply more phosphorus, reducing your tillage. Check it all the way over there to the cost or the savings associated with those. I know you're going to look at these and you're going to say, I know about a lot of other things that I can do on my field that reduce nutrient runoff, and they're not showing up here. Well, that's because they haven't been backed up by peer-reviewed scientific research. So there's lots of stuff going on that you all are investing in through the Nutrient Research and Education Council to help keep that list going. Keep it, adding those tools to your toolbox and refining what we do know about them. This is the really fun thing, and I can't see it at all up here, so I can't even remember what the exact numbers are, but I like to point out number 2, the number 2 scenario, and this is where the science team combined all of the practices on a statewide level to figure out how much action do we really need. That second scenario is my favorite, and that's at like the bargain price of $800 and something million a year. And it's a lot of action, including, I think, bioreactors on, somebody's gonna have to tell me because I can't see, a substantial amount of our acres, and cover crops on like 100% of our tiles. So Chris is gonna be far busier with his cover crop guidance because that's gonna take a lot. But what I like to focus on is what we can do. And I like to highlight the 4th one down where it starts to talk about the 20% reduction at the more reasonable price of around $200 million a year. I think we probably do a level of activity that's close to that already. I think we already spend about that much money between all of our cost share programs, all of the money leaving everybody's pocket personally. I think it's manageable. So take a look at that. Do we have any livestock folks in the room? Raise your hand. I don't work for EPA, so you can raise your hand. Okay. I know you all feel very left out when it comes to environmental regulation. So I wanted you to know that you're also included in the strategy, but you have like 4 pages instead of 40 pages because we know you have lots of other rules to worry about. But you're there, and it's BMPs, what you do in your field where you're land applying and what you do back at your production area to keep it for the crop. Here's your major components. So these are not my version of the major components. This is EPA's version, but really we have a lot of meetings. We have 7 different working groups where we all have to keep getting back together and talking about this issue from now until maybe the end of time, representing farmers every step of the way to make sure this doesn't take on a different life of its own. But it's we get an opportunity to do it voluntarily. The regulatory is up there on that first bullet to make sure you're still awake and to make sure that you're paying attention, because the regulatory discussion is not for farmers. That is the point sources. They are permitted, they'll continue to be permitted. We have a great opportunity to do this voluntarily. But we're no longer in the world where we say, you know what, we don't want to be regulated, please just leave us alone. We have got to come back with proof, with evidence, right? I'm broken, I'm a lawyer, but we have to have evidence. But today is perfect evidence, and that's what we will be talking about. We talk to this many farmers, and people care in the state. And our regulators are sitting back just holding on for the ride, because it's amazing what the farmers in our state have done in response to this issue. We had a 160-page document to encourage collaboration. If that's really what it takes to see people work together in our state, including agencies, that's pretty sad. I don't think we need a 160-page document to tell us to work together. We can already do that. This is one of the new diagrams that shows up in the strategy. This is about prioritizing. You know, I always joke that I work for Illinois Farm Bureau and every county is my priority, but we work in a world where everything has to be prioritized. So our state agencies, our federal agencies are going to be focusing in on these priority areas. That handout is right in front of you, or should be, so you can see where they're headed, and it might look familiar, looking at phosphorus, looking at nitrogen, and where they will go. That means maybe more cost share, so that could actually be a cool thing if you're on the priority list. It also will mean more monitoring, though. So they're going to look to see if they're pouring cost share and education programs into certain areas. What does that mean for the water to change? So we do have to report to the public every 2 years. How well did you do? And we are working on that as an industry every quarter, reporting what we have done. And there's a lot of work that we are doing. These are all of the working groups, so I won't bore you with that because I'm running out of time. But if you ever want to know, go online. EPA has a website with all the agendas, all the minutes. I wouldn't say that everything they say I said, so don't hold me to it and don't call me and say, why did you say that in that meeting? But it's this handy little website, which I'm sure you can just jot down. I'm just teasing. I would recommend you just Google Illinois Nutrient Loss Reduction Strategy. I normally spend some time talking about what agriculture is doing, but I will cut it short. And Steve already heard me say this yesterday to the Lieutenant Governor. It's like 6 more slides, 7 more slides. People working together, formally, not so formally, people working separately. Lots of money, lots of time, lots of people are focused on this issue in all of your ag groups, and there's a lot of ag groups. And lots of people are focused, the retailers, the corn growers, the Soybean Association, Farm Bureau. Since you gave me the mic and I work for Farm Bureau, I'll tell you what we did. So $100,000 in a grant program to our local county farm bureaus for the first time ever. I know it's not $800 million, but it's something, right? And we have a lot of really cool ideas that are going to happen on the local level, because that's the strength of Illinois Farm Bureau, is at the county level, and that means all of you. So talk to Mike, he'll fill you in on some of the details about the projects around this area. But I know I probably made people unhappy saying no, but we had over $312,000 worth of requests for only $100,000 to give. So they had to be really good projects to get it. But lots of other efforts. The Council on Best Management Practices has a great website that's geared at being a one-stop shop where you can find out about the nutrient strategy. You can fact check me, that's fine. Go check and see what it actually says. I encourage it. Call me if you have questions or you disagree with anything that I said. But the website is illinoiscbmp.org, and you can find a lot of great stuff about events and different initiatives going on. So check it out. We have a newsletter coming out quarterly, and the next one is next week. So hurry, go home, sign up, or sign up on your phone today. The Nutrient Research and Education Council, that's how a lot of the projects, you guys, raise your hand if you know that you're investing $1 per ton of fertilizer into research. It's phenomenal. Without it, and without it leaving state government, we wouldn't have a whole lot, okay? So it does not going to cover or plug the hole that we really, really have, but it will help. And Lowell will be here to tell you how some of your money is invested. Julie Armstrong's in charge, talked to you about that. Look on Earth Day, quiz, anybody know when Earth Day actually is?
Every day.
Every day is Earth Day. I hear that in every meeting I do with farmers. That's very predictable, but it is the very end of April, and we will be unveiling a conservation story map that many different organizations in our state have been putting information into. So again, check out this website, and we'll be coming to you in April. That's what it looks like. Okay, so that's all the effort. Corn growers, Rodney Weinzierl has his ladies and gentlemen running all over the state, and then some, doing some really cool things. Over $5 million in an NRCS project just to them in the last couple weeks. So kudos to them and the time that they spent, and we look for more information coming from them. But it's all about precision conservation management and tying into your farm economics. So we wish them luck, and it's a big road ahead. Soybean Association, Pork Producers, Beef Association, everybody focused on the environment. IFCA, can't leave them out. All your retailers are taking pledges that they will recommend to farmer customers to do certain things. Wait to apply your anhydrous until the soil temps are 50 degrees and going down at the 4-inch level. Don't apply to frozen or snow-covered ground, things like that. So if you haven't heard from your retailer about those, you should expect to hear from them. You can also go on IFCA's website and check to see if your retailers have in fact taken the pledge. If they haven't, you should just ask them why not. And I can't leave Department of Ag out. They do so much for us, including that NASS survey. So when you get the NASS surveys, don't ignore them. That's our evidence right now. If you want to know more about that, we can certainly talk before I leave today. But look for that around July. I know you get gazillions of them, but this one will be our evidence. This is our logic model, and this is my last point. Evidence, okay? If we put a probe and we wait for the water to change, we may not win this, right? It may take decades to actually show. We will be tracking what happens on the land, which means that NASS survey is very important because we have no resources to get out and visit every single farm. So it's up to farmers to respond to the NASS survey as our evidence. But what other evidence do we have? Today is our evidence. Human activity is our evidence. So we keep track of things that we do, and it's looking really good. And I can show you the reports if you're interested. This is the logic model. That's what we call it. That's how we prove our case. So I just wanted to explain that. In closing, I like to think not about the challenge, but about the opportunity. We as an industry have an opportunity to do this on our own terms, right? To do what makes sense for your individual fields on your particular soil types, not because it's on the books in some regulation, because guess what? When it makes it onto the books in the state of Illinois, it's never coming off whether it works or not. So we don't want something silly to be on the books. We can do this without regulation. But right now, your industry is spending a lot of time spreading the awareness of the issue. Super pumped about the turnout, but take some information and take it back to your coffee shops and to church and to any other board you're on and tell your fellow farmers what's going on. It's a huge issue, and it's gonna take something on absolutely every single acre in our state to see something different. If you try certain things, kudos to you, keep going. It's about continuous improvement on your own terms. So we're still looking for that evidence to be able to tell our story. And I will be around for the rest of the day. Before you leave, in terms of evidence, I have this survey here. Please hand it to some folks at the door before you go. I have no special door prize for you other than a pat on the back and a thank you. But this is my way to talk about what farmers in this area are doing as far as nutrient practices. And it's not, doesn't have to have your name on it, so that's pretty cool too. Thank you very much.